Hi, welcome to the first of the Actiontek Stunt Rigging Toolbox Talks. These are an outgrowth of our daily work talks at the beginning of every day on shows, when we devote a small portion of the day to why we do things a certain way as opposed to just the specific rigs for every day. And the guys like it, and so I figured, and they asked, I would do small videos on these topics, and here we are. They're informal. They are not going to include a whole lot of whiteboard unless the topic requires it, and those will be the more involved topics. They are going to feature empirical evidence, not bro science. We are going to go through the actual numbers and geometry and math as required, folks. I know for most of you this is Nerdville. You can go to sleep now. Nobody really cares. I don't give a shit. But for me, this is important because rigging is all about systems. Performer flying is about using that system to fly the performer safely and to create the visual effects required. So you have to remember, we're dealing with systems here. Each system, each part has a parameters. Each part has a number. Each part has math attached to it. I'll try to breeze over that as quickly as possible so you get the high points, because otherwise most people aren't deep diving this like I do. This is an avocation. I do this in my spare time as well as when I'm working. We will use our 10-ton brake tester. We will use data acquired from our brake tester. We will use anecdotal evidence acquired during our rehearsals with dynos and performers on lines. And yeah, that's how we will explain why we do things a certain way. So that's today. That's the intro. We're done with that, and now we can get on to something that's probably, well, to me it's interesting. To most people, they don't give a shit. But here's today's talk. Performer flying connections. Most performers wear a harness when we fly them, whether it's a martial arts harness or a full jerk harness. Stunt performers tend to be in full jerk harnesses. Doesn't matter. The only harness we totally endorse and or believe in and or use is Climbing Sutra. They have a long track record of safety, of investigation, of research, of creating a better product. We use only Climbing Sutra harnesses. That's what we do. So we will be, when we say harness, be referring to those, of course. The other thing is 12-strand hollow braid synthetic line is what we exclusively fly people with these days, unless a situation determines otherwise. So as a whole, when I say rope, that's what we're going to be talking about, unless I make a disclaimer. And of course, when we talk about the rope we use in that specific toolbox talk, we will get into all the various Technora, Dyneema, PBO, Vectran, liquid crystal, etc. ropes, synthetics these days. But that's an entire world. You can spend hours deep diving that. So today's talk, we're going to talk about connecting to performers. That means the performer flying line or lines, depends on how many you have, and the actual connector to the harness. So today, I'm going to talk about this connector versus this connector and why we use which one we use. This connector, I never thought about it until I traveled and spent a lot of time out of the United States, is used in a lot of countries. It is a piqué, maillon rapide, also known as a quick link. It is a threaded connector. It is designed in piqué's literature, if you read it, as a chain link. It's a substitute for a chain link. It's something that's not forged together. It is something you can attach. Okay, it has a threaded boss, barrel nut, and it has a threaded stem. Okay, the threads are on the stem, the inside threads are on the boss. You thread the connector together. This connector is a 6mm specifically, because this is the one predominantly used when other people fly. It has to be fully 100% thread engaged. It also requires a tool. On this, the torque spec is 1.6 kilonewtons. I didn't measure that. I know how much that is from playing with a torque wrench. So there it is, fully connected. At this point, this connector is rated to 650 kilos working load limit. It is minimum braking strength of 3,250 kilos. It is stamped working load limit. It also has a serial number. It can be identified. All good points for tracking. Now, this connector in use for stunt flying harnesses has several issues. We'll go through them one by one. The main one we will start with is the radius of the inside of this connector is not sufficient for the harness straps that you're putting it through. This is around, let's be very around, approximate, 14.50 millimeters inside. Your harness straps are between 18 and 25.4 millimeters. Depends on if it's an X cross on the back of a suture harness or if it's the picks underneath the ribs or across the upper chest. If it's a single strap, it's 18 plus nominal. And if it's a cross strap, it's 25 plus. Okay, so what happens is you get this connector on, you have wider webbing than this is in terms of diameter and radius. So what you're doing is taking a connector, which PK has a diagram on their website and their charts about how this should be pulled. And even if you line it up, on the side it is through the webbing, it is pulling in a diagonal direction from the sides of the webbing. The webbing's wider than the throat of this connector. Okay, that's point one. So you're multi-axially loading this connector. It is not designed for multi-axial loading. It is designed for single point loading opposed, both ends opposed from one another. Works great, 12 mil pins, hang this on another chain or whatever, it pulls direct on end, great. Now, the problems become multifold in use further. You go to put this on a harness, you only have a 9 millimeter opening on a standard EN quick link. You have to get that through the webbing, and you have a threaded, sharp thread to try to fit through the very tight webbing. The webbing's tight because even if it's a used harness that people have been wearing for a while, they have a back pad on. They're cinched up extremely tightly in it. There is no room to get this large diameter through that. This is 9 millimeter in diameter at the threads, and the threads are 90 degrees opposed. So you're tearing the threads up with a sharp threaded object trying to get through that harness. If by chance you fit that through that harness, because you can't get the barrel nut through, so you always end up threading them this way, whether people do it this way or they do it this way, you still are forcing that. Now you have material wedged in this small radius at the end. You need to bring the barrel nut down without trapping any of the fibers of those harness attachments. You need to get the barrel nut tightened up without catching any costume, wardrobe, yarn telltales that have been left on the pick points, and then cinch it up with a wrench. So you have to have a wrench in your hand as well. You've done all that correctly. You've got your performer line now here. You've got your harness here. Or if you've threaded it the other way and you found it works, it's the other way around. It still doesn't matter. You still have 18 to 25 millimeters of webbing or more wedged in the incorrect radius. So you are multi-axially loading this, even if you've done all of those things correctly. As a side note, when you pull multi-axial loading on these with webbing, it spreads these two spines apart. You'll notice that when you take apart one of these, you go to unhook your performer and you crack the threads loose, and then you wonder why you have to keep using a wrench to try to get it all the way off, which is always really convenient when your performer is standing on something or somewhere inaccessible and you're trying to get them off the line. The reason that happens is the multi-axially loading spreads these two pins apart from one another, and it makes it difficult to get this unthreaded. Okay, that's proof that it's multi-axially loading, because otherwise, if it's single point loading, this would stay in the same place. And to further prove it, if you crimp this free end a little bit in, use a wrench, a pair of channel locks, a small vise, then suddenly this barrel nut slides on and off very easily. So you have a number of things that are wrong with this connector, but in basis, the worst part of this connector is it is not designed for multi-axially loading. So what's the solution? Bow shackle. This is a Wishard bow shackle. It has a bell on the bow shackle. This curved radius here is 19.5 millimeters across. You can put multi-angle loadings in a bow shackle. There's a ton of evidence on all the charts from all the manufacturers. I'll just use Crosby as an example on the angular loading of a shackle, and they will give you all the, to the point of 90 degrees, give you the D rating of pulling it 90 degrees sideways, or what you can load within the bell, okay? But the main topic here is it can be multi-axially loaded. So a piece of webbing, if it's pulling in 2 points in a vector that's not vertical, is still acceptable within this bell, within the bow of the bow shackle, okay? So in use, how does this help? Well, first off, it's a smooth, polished stainless steel piece of equipment. Secondarily, where you have to thread it through the harness, it is only 5.5 millimeters thick. So now you're trying to get 5.5 millimeters through a gap on a tight harness that a performer's in with a back pad, and you can slide it through because it slips through. Side note here also, folks, thread them up through the webbing, please, because once they're loaded, in tensions on them, pulling, you don't want the pin against the performer. Remember, your performer working line is on the pin of this. So if it's pulling vertically, this is against the performer as opposed to this against the performer. Nothing's more irritating than a chest pick or a rib pick with the pin of the shackle driving into your side, okay? So that's just a side note. You can get this through, work it around so the bell is on the straps, and you can tighten it up. Now, a Wishard shackle is a captive pin. You can't lose it with your big meat hooks. And when you tighten it, you will get to the detents in the threads where it locks. So click once, click twice. It is now locked. It doesn't vibrate loose, and you don't need a wrench. So you've now achieved connecting your performer to his working line. Your working line is on the pin, and you have a perfect connection, despite the fact that it's probably pulling in a vector like this against the webbing. It's designed for this. So folks, here's what we know. This is the correct connector to use for a stunt flying or performer flying application on harness and on webbing, not a piqué maillon rapide or quick link. This is not correct. This is correct. As a side anecdote, I'd like to also mention, this is what they test the harnesses at Sutra with. This is what they endorse. Now, you can always use a larger maillon or use a larger shackle if you find the need or think that 440 kilos is not a sufficient working load for a heavy drop or whatever. That's your decision, and we could get into that in a minute. But basically, this is the standard that's used, the 6 mil pin shackle from Wishard. Polished, smooth, user-friendly, harness-friendly, and the correct tool for the job due to its ability to handle multi-axis loading. Okay? Thank you, and see you next time.